So my name is Martin Gontovnikas, but everybody calls me Gonto. My mom is pissed off because she really likes Martin, but I'm Gonto, sorry. We're in the tech world, so my Twitter handle is mgonto. If you want to ask me a question or follow me to increase my ego, I'd be happy with any of them. And then the title of the talk is The Power of Trends. And it's basically more around what is the experience that we've had in Auth0 for both content and evangelism. And this is just a trendy name to get accepted into conferences. I always say that getting a cool, neat title is half the job to actually get accepted. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a systems engineer. I've been doing software engineering for some time, and then I moved to the dark side. So now I'm actually doing marketing. So I'm this evil person that now tells you to do things and stuff like that. But something that is interesting is that right now I'm working at Auth0. I'm going to tell you shortly what Auth0 is about so that you get some of the examples that it is. But the main idea is that Auth0 is a SaaS for authentication. So if you don't want to implement authentication and you want to get it done securely with either username and password, social connections, or enterprise connections, you can use Auth0. And then a very small ad, which is that we're hiring people for DevRel, both in Europe as well as in the US. So if you want, go to that URL, and we'd be happy to have you on our team. And something interesting for me for this talk is that being an engineer, I always say that I'm designed better to use the left part of my brain. That's the part about analytics, number, math, etc. But for both content marketing as well as the DevRel, we actually had to use both parts of the brain. It's also about using the right part. And to learn why, I basically need to start from the beginning. And I'm going to tell you a little story about Auth0 and what has been going on with Auth0. I shouldn't have picked this GIF because the light is killing me with the blue, green, something. Anyway, so when I started at Auth0, our signups were flat at 1,500. So we were having 1,500 signups every month. We weren't growing, and we were like this. Like, we wanted to be a good company. We were building a good product, and we wanted people to actually see it. We wanted people to try it out, and we wanted people to say, hey, this is cool. I don't like this, or I do like this, or something like that. So in order to start increasing this number of signups, what we said is, let's try to do some experiments. I mean, I'm an engineer, so I'm working now on marketing. I don't know marketing because I'm an engineer. So let's try to do experiments, and based on that, let's try to grow. So as a background, what is an experiment? And the main idea to me is that an experiment is about getting a very big problem, decomposing it into smaller parts. For each of those parts, using both qualitative and quantitative information, create a hypothesis of something that you think you can do to change or to improve, then set up a metric, which is how you're going to measure success, set up a goal, so that if you get to that goal for that metric, you're going to succeed, or otherwise you won't. And then you set some time frame, so that you get to try it out in certain time frame, because depending on the experiments, it will be different. And then you run the experiment, you see what's going on, and you continue and iterate from there. Something interesting to me is that I don't consider any experiment a failure. You're going to see later on in the presentation that we've tried a lot of experiments, and by failing, as long as you actually go deep, try to understand, and try to learn why, that's not a failure, because then you can create a new experiment based on that. To me, a failed experiment is an experiment in which you don't check why it was okay, you don't check why it worked, you don't check why it didn't work. So then, why did you even try? So the first thing you need to do experiments and for marketing is understanding your target market. I'm an engineer, so for me it was easy to understand myself. Well, sometimes, sort of. So what do developers do? When do they do it? Why are they doing it? And for me, it was something like this. Like, every time I wanted to do something and I didn't know, Google is my best friend. I always say that for being a developer, I have to be very, very good at searching on Google. So I was searching modules on NPM, or answers to my questions on Stack Overflow, or blog posts, or GitHub, etc. And then what I was doing is this. I'm very good at doing this. Very good. So, and then if this didn't work, you know what I was doing? Googling another solution, trying to see if there's another snippet of code that I can actually copy and paste, and then try it out again. So since I was doing a lot of this, I said, okay, what can we try? What can we start doing? Let's start trying experiments to try bringing more people to know and realize what Auth0 is. So the first experiment was Auth0-related blog posts. So every time we were shipping a new feature, we were doing a blog post. Or every time now that we found a cool use case for Auth0, we were also writing a blog post. So for this, the idea was that the metric was going to be the page views and the signups. So how many people see this content, how many people sign up after actually seeing this content. And the time frame was approximately 6 weeks to get it to work. And then our plan was to publish like 4 or 5 articles. So we started with this. And yeah, it kind of didn't work. So we were sad it didn't work. But at the same time, as I said, in any experiment, it can fail. It's just about learning. So what did we learn? We increased page views 4%. So the number of page views, the number of people who were seeing the content was actually going up. But we were still flat on signups. We weren't growing on signups. So what we did is we served or scuba dived into the data to see what was going on. And what we figured out is that the people that were coming to the blog were already Auth0 users. So we were actually never going to convert them to signups. But once some of these very little people that weren't Auth0 users, they weren't converting also because it was something related to Auth0. So what we started digging around is actually asking on Twitter, doing surveys, asking other people, like, what would you like to read? What would you like to see in the blog? What would interest you about the product? And that's when we came with this second idea, which is, let's do Greenfield content. So instead of teaching people how to use Auth0, let's actually teach them useful stuff. Let's actually teach them how to authentication to a React application, or how to authentication to an Angular application, or how to use JSON Web Tokens in a Ruby API or a Node.js API. So the idea here was that we were going to write a big article, a big piece of content on something that's useful to developers, and then add a very small aside saying, hey, if you don't want to do it yourself, you can try Auth0, but just try the product. It's free. If you like it, you continue using it. If not, that's OK. You can ditch it. So for doing that, we went into several tools to start learning what should we be writing about. One of them was Google Trends. So Google Trends is a very good tool to see what people are looking for and at what point in time. So this is the curve for React.js, and as you can see, it's growing. And I don't know why, but in this data, it's so React.js is probably a good and interesting topic to actually be talking about. Another tool we use is GitHub Trending. So GitHub Trending, you can see by language and by time frame, so month, day, week, etc. You can see what repositories are popular and are being started or forked. So based on this, we were looking at what cool stuff were people doing, and then if something was interesting, but it didn't get still a lot of attention, or it did get attention, but there wasn't a tutorial, we said, let's actually write. Let's actually do something about this. Another tool was the Asterix Weekly. So now we have JavaScript Weekly, Node Weekly, Ruby Weekly, React Weekly, Angular Weekly, and whatever weekly you want. And in there, they get a lot of content out, interesting things. So we were also seeing what things are people talking about so we can actually use that content. And lastly, Twitter. This is something very interesting that a lot of people are saying, no, Twitter is dying. I hate the 280 characters. Well, I hate it too. But other than that, all of the developers are still on Twitter. And even though I feel I don't have time now to read the timeline, something that we were using is a tool that's called Nuzzle. I think that's the way. My accent sucks. But it's Nuccel. And what that tool does is it gives you a daily summary of all of the links that were fabbed and retweeted the most by the people you follow. So if I were following cool developers, probably the links that I get daily are going to be cool links, and we can learn from that what type of content or what type of things we want to start creating based on that. So based on all of this, we started to choose content, and we said, again, we're going to do page views and signups as a metric. We're going to try it out for a few weeks, and we're going to see what happens. It didn't work. Again, we were like, why doesn't this work? So we didn't increase that much the page views. That was the main thing that we see. There wasn't that many people actually reading our content, but our conversion rate to sign up, so that means that the people who did see the content were actually signing up. So that means that these new posts were getting people to sign up and try the platform. The only problem we had is that nobody was actually seeing what we were writing. So again, thanks to this failed experiment, we were able to understand what happened, and we created a new experiment, which was based on this previous one, which is, what if we actually make sure that actually people see what we are doing? So one of them was this SEO optimizations. So we are working now on keywords. We check that the keyword is in the title, in the subtitle. We check context keywords, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that we did is create a distribution list. So one of the problems we had is that nobody was reading our content because nobody was finding it. It's like this story where if a tree falls and nobody listens to it, does it make a sound or not? Well, for us, it doesn't because we weren't getting signups. So the idea here is, let's create a distribution list. Let's search and look for places where we can actually now share this content. So for example, that could be a subreddit, that could be Hacker News, it could be Facebook groups, it could be LinkedIn groups. I actually have one example in here, two examples. One is the actual SEO checklist that we use at Auth0, which is, for example, like, what is the keyword there? Is the title less than this amount of characters? Is the description? And some of the things seem like weird. Like, why does the title have to be under, I think it was 56? Yes. Unless, at most 56 characters. And that's because if you add more, Google will add a ... into your title. And if you do that, the CTR, so the number of people who click on that link, lowers a lot. So basically, we were following all of this. And then once we finished the content, we had the distribution flow. And this is basically, depending on the type of content, where do we share it? Like what subreddit, what LinkedIn groups, what Facebook groups, and what other places should we be sharing the content depending on the content type that we're using. So this was the new experiment that we tried. And yay, unicorns! It actually worked. This was the first experiment that we did that worked. What happened here is that we actually increased the page views 10%, and we increased monthly signups 7%. So we were finally not at 1,500 signups anymore. So we were about to pop or open a champagne, we were about to drink wine, drink beer, I don't know, do everything. But then this happened. I was talking to the CEO, telling him like, hey, it's working, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. And he told me this interesting phrase, which is that it's a business, it's a company, and the company wants to have a meaningful exit. And for a company to have a meaningful exit, it has to grow approximately 10% the revenue every month. And to grow 10% the revenue every month, how many signups do you think you have to grow? A lot more than 30. A lot more than 10. So 7, more than 10. We were sad. Because that meant we needed to work more. So in this case, we did 3 experiments. One of them worked. The previous ones didn't. So we said, why don't we try doing the same? Why don't we try doing more experiments? So how can we enhance this? And now it's Sherlock Holmes time. And it was like, let's go, let's check the data, let's see what other things we can do. And we said, OK, now we got it. And this is an interesting stuff. And this is a graph made by our actual data from the blog. And what this is saying is that if a person sees one article, they have a 0.1% conversion rate to sign up. So that means that every 1,000 people that sees a blog post, 1 signs up. But if they see 2 blog posts, 1.2 conversion rate. And if they see 7 blog posts, it's 9.8. So for every person that sees 7 blog posts, 10 out of 100 actually convert to a sign-up. So based on this data, which was our data for Auth0 itself, we said, OK, what experiments can we do with this to actually explore increasing the conversion? And what we did when we were analyzing the data like this is we were actually checking a lot of different variables and plotting them in different cases to see if the conversion rate was bigger. And this was a clear example of that happening. So our ideas were several. These are some of them. So one of them was blog post series. So we want people to come back. We want people to read more blog posts. So what if we, instead of writing 1 blog post, we do a React series, and we do 7 blog posts, where you expect every Thursday there's going to be a new blog post, and that blog post is going to talk about another thing about React, but we're getting people to come back to the blog. In that case, for example, it was actually helping with conversions. Another example was a newsletter. So we added an email newsletter that people could subscribe, and then they could read the content. So that was actually a kind of a failed experiment. We are still doing it, but we had very, very few people that were actually registering, and we didn't know why. So when you want to learn why, it's time to ask questions. So we started asking, like, what's going on? And people were saying, I hate email. It sucks. And I agree, because if you send me an email, I'll take 1 week to answer, because I hate email. So based on that, we said, OK, how can we let people know of new things without email? And that's where blog push notifications happen. Now the browsers like Safari, Chrome, Firefox, I don't know Internet Explorer, sorry, but all of them had push notifications. So now people register to them, they don't have to enter their email, and they get now a push notification of every piece of content that we write. And then furthermore, for every article that you read, we also recommend you what other articles you can read based on that. So these were all very separated experiments that we tried. And as I said, newsletter, for example, failed. All of the 3 actually worked. And thanks to this, we started to grow more. So now we started to increase monthly signups 15%, and we increased our page views 10%. So not good enough. It's never good enough, right? It's capitalism. So how can we increase it? How can we be Sherlock Holmes and start thinking about it? And we had no clue. We didn't know what to do. But again, capitalism, we needed to do it. So we started asking questions. I think that the best way to find a good answer is asking good questions. It's sitting down and asking the questions that you need to find out how you can do this. So one of our questions here is, how can we jump on developer trends? So for example, Angular was a trend, but then React appeared, and well, Angular is not that much of a trend anymore. Now React is more of a trend, for example. Then Vue.js appeared, and now Vue.js is kind of starting to be a trend. So how can we jump into these trends? Those are examples of Frontend only that are existing, and can we jump that wave? Or how can we make people aware of the stuff that we write? How can we make the people who are Vue.js developers, React developers, actually know of what we're writing? Because the main thing is that our content, it was proven, it was good, and it was converting. We just needed more and more eyes to see it. So, sorry, this is a shitty GIF. But the main idea here is that what we wanted to do is, we didn't know. So we couldn't use this left part of the brain, this analytical, mathematical thing that we were doing. We actually had to use the right part of the brain, because what we ended up figuring out is that maybe it's about people. What if it's about people? What if it's not about numbers? What if it's not about this hypothesis? What about if it's not that, like this experiment? So thinking more about it and thinking more about people, we started to see these things. Like first, we started to attend framework conferences, like Angular conference, React conference, etc. And we were trying to talk about authentication and JSON Web Tokens. We would never talk about Auth0, because every time I go to a conference and I listen about a vendor talk, I hate it. Like I just leave the room, I don't want to see it. And as a developer, something that's crazy for me is like I go buy clothes and like somebody comes and he says like, hey, do you need help? No, go away. So that's me. And what I want is to research on myself and learn. So what we were trying to do here is teach people. We were trying to teach people what is authentication, what are the OAuth or OpenID Connect protocols, what is JSON Web Token. And we were trying to add value to people. We actually had an event calendar that I forgot to open, and without Wi-Fi, it's going to be hard. But the main idea we were having is which are the events that we want to go, by which dates, who has applied, who needs to apply, why are we doing that. And the main thing here, and this is something that I truly, truly think and value, is that you always have to be honest and genuine and add value to people. That to me is something that is very, very, very important, because if you're not genuine, people will realize. When you come to me and you're trying to sell me something that you don't believe in, or when you try to tell me something you don't believe in, that's never going to work. I actually have a good story for this. I was I was once at NGConf. It's an Angular conference in Utah. And I gave a talk, and then I was talking to a guy, and he was asking me, hey, I have like a pet project, and I actually want to add Facebook and Twitter. Would you recommend me adding Auth0? And of course, what everybody would say if I work at Auth0 is, yes, Auth0 is great for everything. You have to use it. And the answer was actually the opposite. It's like, if you only need Facebook and Twitter, and you only need to integrate those SDKs, don't use Auth0. It's actually like just use your own 2 SDKs. I can actually help you out, and I helped him out do that. And Auth0 is good if you want to have your user store secure, or if you want to have enterprise providers, but not really just for this. So the guy went away, and then 2 years later, he came back. He actually sent me an email, and he said, like, hey, I'm working at X company, and now we're actually selling to other companies, and we need to use enterprise providers. And I remember you helped me out, and you told me that for that, Auth0 was useful. And we actually got a $300K deal out of that by just adding value, being genuine, and being honest, because that's what we were trying to do. And if your product is good, you just need people to get to try it out. I always say that our job at marketing is education, and also partly to get people to try out the platform. Because if the platform is good, you're going to love it, you're going to want to use it. And that's the way it should be. I shouldn't be selling you, there's an expression in Spanish where like Columbus came and he gave the Indians like very nice mirrors in exchange for all of the land. So that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And something that was interesting here is that we actually started to be followed and read by devs that spoke and attended these conferences. So to me, again, the conference is about being genuine and connecting and knowing people. Usually, this time I am, but usually I sometimes don't even go to some of the talks because I can see the talks offline. To me, a conference is about meeting people. And something that's interesting is that most conferences have what's called a speaker dinner. And imagine who are the speakers of an Angular conference. Well, they are the creators of Angular or the creator of open source projects that have to do with Angular. And if you genuinely care about them and knowing other people, because to me that's DevRel, it's genuine interest in other people, other cultures, and learning new things, you can build relationships with them. And then when you actually start writing good content and you share it with them, like, hey, I just wrote this, what do you think? They're actually going to start sharing your content because it's good and because you build a real relationship with them. So something that started happening now is that the Angular developers were reading more of our content because they were following Brad Green or all of the creators of Angular, and that was actually pretty neat. So now they were starting to read and follow all of our content, and we were increasing that. And also, since we weren't talking about Auth0, we were talking about general stuff on authentication, JSON Web Tokens, we actually started to be the go-to questions for authentication. And now, because our site started to get popular, because more people were reading it, more people were seeing it, devs wanted to write content for our site. So we created the guest author program. And the main idea of this is, if you write content, you can write it in Auth0, you can get it exposed to more than like millions of people because that's our page views, and we actually pay you for that. We pay you $200 because we did the math of how good a good article is for us, how much revenue it can bring, and we can actually pay up to $200. So that's what we are doing now. And all of this was what got us to actually grow even more on traffic and even more on signups. So going back to the present and going faster because I'm running out of time, this is the page that shows like what is Auth0. And our ranking, for example, in the US is the 2,000 sites, and globally is 6,000. If you think we're about technology, that's pretty high up for being a tech site. Imagine that Facebook is 1, and Facebook and Google are 1 and 2nd, and they are seen by everyone. So what's next for us? Going very fast. One of them is called Auth0 Ambassador Program. So you probably heard about Google's GDE or Microsoft MVP. This is very similar, but the value of being a Google developer expert is that I have the Google brand. Auth0 brand is not as powerful as that. So what value do we give to people? And the main value we actually give to people here is teaching them. So what we're doing is we're finding developers that have spoken at meetups who want to start speaking at conferences and all of us actually give them a training on how to write a CFP. We help them practice. We help them write the talks. And if they get accepted to a talk, as long as they wear an Auth0 t-shirt and they mention we brought them there, we pay their flight tickets and the hotel so they can actually speak at the conference. And this is, again, something that I love because it's being genuine, we are being honest, we're helping developers, and that's basically what we're doing here. And it's good for the company because we're getting a lot of people exposed to Auth0. It's good for people because we're teaching them how to talk. And it's also good for everyone. So this program is running right now, and Ado here is the one who's running it. And to give you an idea, in November, we had 30 events. November has 30 days. So that means that we had approximately 1 event per day thanks to this program. And now, finishing up, if there's one thing that I want you to remember about this talk is that content distribution is always about good quality content, but it's also about people. Never forget that. Thank you.